We are back on the Law Live Audio Wrestling, and it's time now for me to introduce a man who, quite frankly, is known as the Podfather of
goodness.
all wrestling podcasts. Because, I mean, listen, this is the only guy that I know who probably does more of these damn podcasts than even me. It's a little silly. And this is a guy who, listen, I haven't talked to this guy in a long time, but let me just bring him in. Conrad Thompson, the man. How you doing today, Conrad?
I'm great, man. How are you? Long time no see.
Absolutely. So I want to get into this right away because here's the biggest question. How does a 15-year-old kid from Alabama go from calling into radio shows like this when it first started, like Live Audio Wrestling, right?
Mm-hmm.
To becoming one of the biggest names in all of professional wrestling podcasting? Take me through this. How did this take place?
Total accident, man. I eventually sort of put away my wrestling fandom and doubled down on my professional career in the mortgage business. And through that, started advertising my company on radio and television, and just got familiar with doing live television and live radio and got comfortable with that. And eventually, I met Ric Flair at a meet and greet, and he had just lost his son Reed to an overdose back in 2013, and we just hit it off. And he was looking for a friend, and he was probably drinking too much, and I was in party mode in my life, and anytime he wanted to hang out, I was there. So he'd come over and watch the draft, or I'd go over and we'd watch the playoffs, and we just became friends. So when he had some waiting for wishes event, like a celebrity waiter type event at the Palm in Nashville, right off Broadway, I went up and hung out, and we had a great time, and actually met little Richard. He lived in the Hilton next door. It was really surreal. But through the course of that trip, he asked, "Hey, what's a podcast? How do you make money with a podcast?" And I said, "Well, that's pretty random. Didn't expect you to ask that. Where does that come from?" And he had an offer from CBS. So his agent at the time negotiated it. They worked it out, and he got kind of nervous when it came time to actually do the show. He said, "It would just be weird for me to just talk to a microphone. Do you think you could come in and just let me bounce stuff off of you and just ask me fan questions? And we'll have a guest, and we'll have Harley Race on." And I go, "Yeah, hell yeah, absolutely." So he, at the time, didn't really understand the way podcasting worked, and he wanted me to actually come over to Atlanta. I'm in North Alabama in Huntsville, and I said, "No problem." So it's a 28-minute flight. So bang, 30 minutes, I'm there. We knock it out. And afterwards, at the end of it, the CBS folks were like, "Hey, that was pretty good. Can you come back next week?" And so I became an accidental podcaster, but that was not the original plan. It was just, "Hey man, I'm creating content with Ric Flair. This is kind of fun. And I'm getting to talk to some legends." And a few weeks in, it clicked for me. Man, I'm spending an arm and a leg advertising my mortgage company just in Alabama and Tennessee, but folks all over the country can hear what I'm doing with Rick. And it was a light bulb moment, like, hey, instead of me writing a check to have a radio station DJ lend me their credibility, I can just create my own. And that's what we did. So when the CBS contract was complete, we started our own show, and it was sort of independent, and we were having fun with that. And around that same time, I had become friends with Bruce Pritchard, because I met Bruce through interviewing Rick on the show. And we got to hang out, and because I brought him in to help me shoot a production, to shoot a commercial. We were doing like a recruiting campaign to expand our mortgage company, because now I was looking for the opportunity to not just be in Alabama and Tennessee, but more states. So we grew it to like 46 states. So that means we're going to need more people. So I thought, hey, this guy knows how to do commercials and stuff, and it would be outside of the box from what a local television company might be able to help me with production wise. So I had Bruce over to the house, and we worked together for several weeks off and on. And then one day I said, "Hey man, what happened when the Radicals jumped from WCW to the WWF?" And he turned in his chair on my couch in the living room here, and we just talked for like an hour. And at the end of that story, I said, "Dude, that was a podcast. We should have recorded that." And I had to convince him that no, this could be a podcast, because at the time, he had done a podcast before, but never made any money with it. And it became it was almost a circuit. Oh, Al Snow's got a new book. He's going to be on Stone Cold's podcast and JR's podcast and Chris Jericho's podcast. And by and large, tell mostly the same stories and then plug the book and then he's out of there. But as a consumer of those podcasts, I would say, I kind of just heard Al's story last week. I don't know that I want to hear it again this week. So I said, hey, Bruce, let's move away from the guest format. Let's just do what we just did on the couch, just a conversation about a singular topic. So eventually I convinced him. And the idea was he had just started a pro wrestling tee store and didn't think anybody would ever buy a Brother Love shirt. And I said, dude, this will be a way for you to sell some t-shirts and I'll sell some mortgages. And it just blew up. So when it blew up, we started to learn more about the podcast business and how it worked and the do's and don'ts. And we were just on that train. But behind the scenes, I was expanding my licensing to get in all these other states on the mortgage side. And so before I knew it, I just really realized, hey, man, I'm onto something here. But when I advertised on the radio, I didn't just advertise one day a week. I advertised 5 days a week. So how do I come up with a whole network of these podcasts to recreate what I was doing on radio and television without having to write a check and actually getting a check? So slowly but surely we built it and now here we are. But it was a total accident. I didn't think I would ever do anything in the wrestling space. I mean, I didn't even watch wrestling for a long time. I just sort of, I really get singularly focused on one thing in my life. And that's what makes me successful, I think, is I just sort of block out everything else. And so I just did that with mortgages and didn't really do anything with it. And then I bought a Ric Flair robe. And before I knew it, it was on Twitter. I mean, not Twitter, but eBay. And I was like, man, this is awesome, but how the hell do I display it? And then once I started to think about where am I going to put this in my house and how will because it's kind of cool to own, but then what do you do with it once you have it? Like the chase was the fun.
Yeah.
I didn't really think about that. So then I started to say, okay, I'm going to display it with an old NWA world title. So I did that with Dave Milliken. And then I saw on his website a few days later, he had the original Ric Flair nameplate off the big gold belt. So I thought, dude, that's pretty cool. I'd like to have that. I reached out to him. He said, I don't have it. My friend has it. He'll never sell it. And I said, well, hypothetically, if he's ever in the market to sell, here's what I would offer. Well, 2 days later, he says, hey, never sell is today. Here's his number. He'd be glad to take your offer. And so once I realized how easy it was to get the nameplate, I started doing some digging and I got the belt. And so once I got the belt, then I was just knee deep in my fandom again. And that's when I started to pay attention. And I went and did these convention type things and met folks. And that's how I met Ric Flair. And here we are.
So it had to be kind of overwhelming when all of a sudden you're like, you fall out of love, so to speak, with the wrestling business as a kid, like a lot of people do.
Yes.
What I mean? It's not that the business changes, I find, right? Because, I spent 26 years doing it. That's why I walked away from doing the show and I went on to do professional wrestling. It's the business doesn't change. People that watch the business change. They grow up, they mature, for lack of a better term, or they get onto different things as they find in life. But here's the one thing that I've always noticed is that there's so many like parallels from real life to professional wrestling life. Like the way that you can handle problems is kind of like I've found myself trying to handle them the same way that I would write a match or, you know what I mean? It's so weird once you start living in both of those lives, how easy they correlate with one another. And I always thought that was fantastic. Now you mentioned Flair's robe.
Mm-hmm.
How many do you have in your house now?
Just the one.
Really?
The butterfly robe, the 92 Royal Rumble. Yeah, I started out looking for that one, and nobody had seen it. Nobody knew where it was. It was just lost, And so even when they did that television show a few years ago, that was real. Like nobody had seen it forever, but I'd been chasing it and even calling it out on all of my pods that I was looking for it. But I collected a bunch of other robes that he had in an effort to try to find that one. And I was always conscious of in that trading community, you need trade bait. And I learned that as a kid. Like when I would open a pack of football cards and I had a Thurman Thomas hologram in there, most kids would be excited. But if I already had it, now I'm like, okay, I'm still excited to have it because now I can trade this to someone else and get something cool with it.
Right.
So I did that through the years, and I actually managed to flipped several of them. I sold two to the 2K people, and they chopped them up and put them in video games. I know a lot of people thought that was sacrilege, but one of them that I cut up had this giant like coffee stain on the shoulder. But I made money on every single robe, or traded it successfully for something even cooler. And the fun for me has always been in the chase and the acquisition more so than the possession. Because as I said, once you have it, it's kind of like, okay, now what? Like it's cool, but like what am I going to do with it now?
Right, because you got to have a pretty big space. You got to get one of those glass cases. You got to get like a life-size mannequin to put it on. You know, it's a process, I can imagine.
It is a process. Now, what I have like to my left right now in the studio, it's just on a hook.
Mhm.
So it's just like hung on the wall. So it's still cool and displayed cool. But yeah, like you could do all this crazy grandiose stuff. Like I'm lucky enough to have a little arcade in my basement here. And I had like this really cool display. And then like a game room where I had like my pool table and my poker table. I had a bunch of that memorabilia stuff in there. But over time, you know, as you're chasing other stuff, you rotate stuff in. So like I've got Ali trunks down there and Tyson trunks down there and a bunch of old jerseys and some here in Alabama. We like an artist called Daniel Moore. He does a bunch of University of Alabama drawings and stuff. So I've got some of that stuff, but you know, your collection evolves as your taste evolves. And as I said, the fun for me was always, I don't know, that Indiana Jones pursuit of the next treasure more so than, hey, we've got it. Now let's wear it to check the mail. That's not really my thing.
Have you gotten a hold of your favorite piece yet, or is the hunt still on for it?
Yeah, listen, there's always a few things that would be cool to find, but I think I've kind of checked most of the boxes I was looking for, you know, like accidentally. Like I used to be in pursuit almost every day for something new. Like in my downtime, you know, at the office or whatever, I would just scour or make connections or reach out to people and just see what's that guy got and what does he have that I want that I could trade and all that. And that was a lot of fun, but then I just sort of I don't know. I guess I grew out of it. But you know,
Yeah.
I used to have Rick Rude tights and Bobby Eaton tights and you know, Ultimate Warrior tights and Hulk Hogan tights. I don't have any tights anymore. I don't have a single pair, but it was a fun thing to do. And then I went through like a boot phase, and once upon a time I had several robes, and I used to have a bunch of really nice made by the real deal belt makers, whether it's Reggie Parks or Joe Marshall or Dave Milliken. I had a bunch of fantastic brand new but high end replica belts. So not like a shop zone replica that was a few $100s, but a real one that was a few $1,000s, just like the organization would order. But then eventually I was like, you know, that's not it. I want ring use stuff. I want battle worn stuff. I want stuff that's got damage on it. I want the side plates hanging off. I want the plates scuffed up. I want the leather beat to shit. Like I like all that. And so that became fun, but then it became like, hey, why do I keep collecting this? At one time I had 5 different ring used intercontinental titles, which on the one hand is cool, but then once I got the Savage one, like the first one that Savage wore, like the WrestleMania 3 one, it's like, well, I don't need any other intercontinental titles. Like before I had this one, it was cool to have the Goldust one or a Miz one or whatever.
Right.
Now it's like, okay, you got the Savage one. That's kind of it. And so in my pursuit of like WWF world titles, once I landed the WrestleMania 17 one with Austin and Rock, it's like, well, I kind of don't need Daniel Bryan's big gold anymore. I mean, it's a cool belt, but like the Rock Austin WWF world title, like that's kind of as good as it gets for my fandom.
Yeah, and we all know that the big gold, I mean, doesn't equate to Bryan Danielson. It's to Rick, or you know what I mean? It's that lineage. So the fact that they brought it back was kind of, I don't know, it was always kind of weird to me. Anyways, I wanted to ask you
that they brought it back. I think it's one of my favorite designs. My actually favorite design is the one that is, because I collect what my fandom was, not like what the wrestling community thinks is cool. I do that with watches and cars and everything that I collect. Like I get what I like, not necessarily the it car or the it watch or the it belt. Like, oh, everybody's crazy for this, like a spinner. I know a lot of my wrestling belt friends, they would love to have a ring use spinner. And I can admit that would be kind of cool. but it would be way down the list of belts that mattered for my fandom. So
Dude, I got to be honest with you. It's one of my worst, like one of my least favorite belts when they came out with that spinner belt. I was like, this just seems weird to me. It just because it reminded me of that age. It reminded me of, oh, we're just putting a car rim on a belt because spinners were a big thing.
Yep.
You know what I mean? When I was a kid. So it was always just really weird to me, but I get it. I get it. There's certain people that was the era that they, you know what I mean, that they fell in love with professional wrestling, just like the era that you fell in love with professional wrestling. That's why you go after the stuff that you go after, right?
You got it.
It's so I want to ask you, how did StarCast become a thing? Like, were you sitting around one day, you know, with somebody and said, hey, I've gone to enough of these conventions, I can put one of these things on, and you know, or was it because of the fan side of you, or was it because of the business side of you, and you wanted to be able to use this to promote your business? How did StarCast become a thing?
Combination of things. I had been enjoying the NWA Legends Fan Fest in August every year in Charlotte, and they had put it on for several years, and then they announced this is the last one, no more. And when I knew they weren't going back, I thought, man, my entrepreneur brain kicked in. There's a whole group of fans who come to this thing every year just to hang out with each other. And the wrestling events are kind of in the background.
Right.
But we have created like a community, and I had one by that time, of wrestling friends, guys that I wouldn't normally see any other time, guys who lived in Massachusetts or lived in Vermont or lived in North Carolina or South Carolina or Texas or Mississippi or Indiana or Illinois. I never saw those guys, but I could always count on seeing them in Charlotte at the NWA Legends Fan Fest. And so we spent most of our time just hanging out at the bar fellowshipping. And when somebody had a photo op that they wanted, then they would, you know, go jump on the escalator at that Hilton and go knock it out. And then if there was a big production, whether it was a Hall of Fame dinner, we'd all go to that, or maybe there was some, I don't know, talk on stage, you know, some sort of panel discussion about Dusty's booking or whatever applied to your fandom, you go knock that out. But then it was back to the group. And I thought, man, there's a group of folks who have already got this week circled on their calendar. This is where they want to go. This is what they want to do. So once I sort of got the itch and got it in my brain, this is what I want to do. I said, let's do a wrestling podcast convention. And at the time, Ricky Morton had one, Jim Cornette had one, Kevin Sullivan had one. And I thought we could just do panel discussions one after another, but still do meet and greets. But we could do it really like a Comic Con, but just for wrestling podcasts, like this emerging market. So I had that idea in 2017, and I thought, I really want to do it. But at the time, I was sort of partnering with Bruce on everything I could because, well, Something to Wrestle had just blown up. And in 2017, we were riding the wave, man, and having a lot of fun and making a bunch of money. And I pitched Bruce on it, and he said, this is the worst idea I've ever heard. You should definitely not do it. I am not interested. And I said, well, I think I'm going to do it. And he goes, okay, well, then I'll do a show there and I'll do your meet and greets, but I want no part of it. Okay, cool. And then I reached out to the hotel, and it had already been booked for a wedding. So they didn't have the capacity for us. All the banquet room was gone. All the meeting rooms were gone, and a chunk of the hotel room. So what I had hoped to do, just slide right into that open spot, was not available. But I still had that in the back of my mind. So that would have been August of 2017 when I had hoped to do it. And then fast forward, and I accidentally bump into Cody at International Baggage Claim in Atlanta. I was coming back from a trip with my now wife. We got engaged down in Cabo, and then we're on our way back. And Cody is coming back from Wrestle Kingdom. It was her birthday trip, and her birthday's in the first week of January. So as we're coming back from Mexico, he's coming back from Japan, and we just start messaging each other. And we actually knew each other from doing Rick's podcast, and I actually met him before I was doing Rick's podcast, I guess, because I had the big gold and I wanted to show it to him because I had heard he had the nameplate for his dad, and he did. So he actually loaned me the nameplate, let me take some photos, and then I sent it back to him and sent him a nice little framed print and all that. So we were friendly. And as he heard about, or he had started talking about that bet with Dave Meltzer, that they could sell out an arena for 10,000 folks. So I messaged him and I said, hey man, I got an idea I want to pitch you. So I did. Hey, what if you're really going to run a show, what if you let me run a wrestling podcast convention around it and we turn that show into a destination for the weekend? He thought it was interesting, wanted me to put down, the whole idea on paper so he could show it to the Bucks, and they loved it. But their one request was, hey, no wrestling, like don't run wrestling matches. I guess the idea was thinking, hey, if he's going to do a quote unquote WrestleCon type thing, we don't want our show to be in competition with that show. We want all the focus to be on our matches, which I was totally cool with. But I pitched ideas that were kind of crazy, like, hey, let's do a weigh-in and a press conference. Like nobody was really doing that in wrestling at that time. And they love that. And so anyway, we did it, and it became like the Woodstock of wrestling. It was super fun. It was a happening, and it was so fun and so successful that once AEW was officially a thing, they asked if I would run another one around their first event out in Las Vegas. And I jumped at the chance to do it. And then they wanted me to do another one in Baltimore for Full Gear. So we did it. No, that was in Chicago. Yeah. So 3 was in Chicago, 4 was in Baltimore. Anyway, we just started piggybacking and they were happy with it and we were too. And then the pandemic happened. And so now it's like, all right, what do we do now? And I didn't really think, they were sort of doing their own thing at that point because they had the Turner Association. I think those folks were really helping handle a lot of their fan fest type stuff. And when they announced that SummerSlam was in Nashville, I thought, man, this is too close to home. I mean, that's less than 2 hours from me. I wouldn't have to ship anything or truck anything. I could just, 2 hours, bam, I'm there. No big deal. So I reached out to Jeff Jarrett because who knows Nashville better than Jeff? Right. And he put me in touch with the fairgrounds people. And then I started to think, okay, if AEW is not coming to town, I know WWE is not going to let me use a bunch of their talent. What do I do? And I decided to be a dumbass and promote a wrestling show. So I had an idea. And as soon as I called Rick and I said, hey man, I'm going to do another StarCast. I'm going to do it in Nashville. We're going to be piggybacking SummerSlam. What if you had one last? And he said, yep, I'm in. And that was it. So we did. I became an accidental wrestling promoter and didn't think I'd ever do that, but we did. And it sold out immediately at the fairgrounds. And so then we had to go dark for a month. And then during that process, we had been working for a while. And then we finally got the commitment from the municipal auditorium and we booked it and put tickets back on sale. And I became an accidental wrestling promoter too. So right place, right time, lots of entrepreneurial thought, I guess.
Would you ever do it again? The promoting part?
Listen, I had fun doing it and I'm really proud of what we put together.
That's not what I asked you.
But
you know as well as I do, it is a pain in the butt trying to be a wrestling promoter.
It is a pain in the butt and it is a thankless deal.
Yeah.
It encouraged me to never want to do it again. Just seeing behavior and the attitudes from fans towards it where, Lord bless them. But I think a lot of fans think wrestling would be better if Impact went out of business. A lot of wrestling fans think wrestling would be better if MLW went out of business, if the NWA went out of business, if AEW went out of business. The idea to see and really realize, hey, nobody hates wrestling more than wrestling fans.
100%, dude.
And it was like, why am I doing this exactly? I mean, boy, this sounds assholish, but it's not like I need the money.
Right.
I was doing this because I thought it would be a fun event and everybody would have a lot of fun. And this would be a special moment. And by the way, for the fans in the arena, it was. I mean, I still get messages at least once a week about that, who just tell me that's the greatest wrestling experience of my life. And if you were in the building, man, it was special. It was a fun weekend, but that show was really special for the folks who were there, who were lifelong fans, and to see generations of people going. So the fans who were there really, really appreciated it, but just the vitriol online for people who thought it would have been better had it not happened. And then I realized, you know what? They do that for everything. They do that for Impact. They do that for NWA. They do that for MLW. Like, I don't know why, but the internet now has decided they hate Billy Corgan and they hate Court Bauer and LOL TNA and Tony Khan's an idiot. And there's all these like, wait, what? Like,
Yeah.
how would this thing you say you love be better if there was less of it?
I've never understood that at all. And there's also this thing is like, if you are wishing the demise on any of these companies at all you're really doing is wishing the demise on the people that you enjoy watching, the people that love the business so much that they became professional wrestlers. Their job, their employment, their entire everything is surrounding themselves around being a professional wrestler. So really, it is the biggest asshole move you can do by being a fan online and just constantly shit talking the thing that you supposedly love. I'll never understand it, but it's been going on ever since the beginning of the internet. You know what I mean? And you know this, right?
I do know this, but what I think has happened is I think I've just realized those people are just malcontents. They're never happy. They're not happy with their own life. And like, because I'll be honest, I watch wrestling every week, but and boy, I probably shouldn't say this, but I watch the shows and fast forward.
Uh-huh.
I record Raw, I record SmackDown, I record Dynamite, I record Collision, yada yada yada. And then I stop on the things I want to see. I know ahead of time, hey, I don't really care for this. I don't really care for that, but man, I really do want to see that. So I just fast forward to that. I can find something in every show that I like.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people wind up hate watching in real time, and they decide that they didn't like the majority of it. And it's like, why do you continue to do that? Like, do the thing, watch and consume the things you enjoy. Don't hate watch, because you're exactly right. When you're stifling someone's, like if TNA had closed when the internet decided it sucked and they didn't want it anymore, would we have AJ Styles?
No.
Or so many other great talents? Like I don't see that, and I don't enjoy that. But and then the other thing is, it's not like I had to do it. And so I think the next step a lot of people thought I would take is, hey, he's going to promote more shows. But number one, where do you go when you're the second highest grossing independent wrestling event of all time? Like if I'm behind All In, so I was sort of loosely associated with All In. Then I did Ric Flair's last match. What the shit can follow that?
Right.
It'd be really hard for me now. And I don't mean for this to sound the way it does, but if the first time you're brushing up against it and around it is you sell out 10,000 some odd seats, and the second time it's Ric Flair's, and that launches AEW.
Mm-hmm.
The second time you're around it is Ric Flair's last match, and there's 7,000 people there. More people saw Flair's last match in that building than they saw his last match of the trilogy with Steamboat. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how is that possible? So it's like, for me, it's like to run a show and hey, 800 people came. It's like, fucking no thanks. Now, and if I was a regular indie promoter, it would be like, oh my God, we got 800, high five.
Right.
But I just, at this point, it's like, why would I do that? Because now if I had these plans of I'm going to launch a promotion, which I don't, then that would be one thing. But I don't have any interest in actually trying to own a wrestling promotion or get a TV deal or compete or, to be the next MLW or NWA or Impact or even AEW. I have no interest in that whatsoever from a business standpoint. So it was just a fun opportunity to make my StarCast event bigger. So will I run another wrestling show? The answer is probably, but it'll be surrounding a StarCast and it'll be another one-off, but it's got to be a really good idea for me to be the promoter on it, because after All In and Ric Flair's last match, and I know the internet at the time thought, oh, this is his new thing. He's going to do a bunch of last matches. Well, respectfully, I can't follow Ric Flair's last match with the Honky Tonk Man's last match. It's just not the same. No. So I don't know what to do with that. So I don't have any intentions of running a wrestling show, but if I do, it'll be letting other people do it and run it, but it'll be piggybacking a StarCast show.
Yeah, I guess. And you got to admit, you open yourself up to a whole lot of criticism.
Yeah.
If you go out there, you do Ric Flair's last match, it does what it does, and then you do something afterwards, there's going to be all of those same people that be, see, told you so. He wasn't really that good at this. He just blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So why bother? Why bother? Because you said yourself, you did this entire thing as you know, you are a fan of the business,
Yes.
of everything
Yes.
around it, and you were giving back to those people that you meet at these conventions, your friends,
Yes.
your wrestling friends. You were like, you know what? I have the opportunity to give back to all of you because I see what this does for all of us. And
Yes.
why open yourself up to the bullshit of the other people when realistically, I mean, come on, we both know you could just put a ring in your fucking backyard, invite over who you want to put on a wrestling match for you and your friends. You know what I mean? If you really wanted to go that route, but you didn't. You chose to go away a route and put yourself out there, so to speak. And that's
Yes.
something that a lot of people won't do. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Is be able to put themselves out there like that. Um, how many, I know that you say that Bruce tried to talk you out of doing the, you know, the Starcast thing and saying that it wasn't a good idea and everything like that. How many people tried to talk you out of doing Ric Flair's last match?
The biggest critic, I mean, obviously Bruce did.
Yeah.
The loudest and proudest to the point where, you know, I wasn't sure we'd be friends again was Jerry Briscoe.
Okay.
And then we wound up being fabulous friends, and now we're both on the board for the Hall of Fame, and I just consider him, you know, one of my better friends in wrestling. But he was adamant that this was a terrible idea, and I mean, we had a not so polite phone call. Now we're all
Did
best of friends again now, but
did
they're
he think it was a bad idea from like Rick's point of view, like putting Rick out there for his last match, or did he think it was a bad idea just putting on the entire event?
Rick wrestling again.
Right.
But the reality is, what he didn't know, because he hadn't been in as regular communication as I had, is Rick had been getting a lot of offers to wrestle. I mean, from really remote areas. Like, he had a really solid offer to wrestle his last match in Venezuela. I mean, I know that's random, but like there were, I mean, I saw really, I won't say the talent's name, but their talent you see on TV every week, and they were actively campaigning to have Ric Flair's last match. And there were promoters who were trying to put it together. There was one, I shouldn't list the promotions, but I know for sure of at least three that I saw on Rick's phone, because he said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And just handed me his phone. And I'm like, "Are you going to do this?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know. What do you think?" And so then I said, "You know, Rick, if you're going to do it, I don't know that you have to have some other promoter's help. You could do it yourself." And he goes, "Oh, I don't want to do that." So my offer to Rick when I called was, "Hey, we'll be co-promoters. You know, like this whole weekend will be based around you." So Rick was our partner on that thing. So, you know, if you got I don't even remember if he was there, but if you got a Bubba Ray Dudley meet and greet and it was some sort of rev share deal, then Ric Flair did okay on that. So he did, it's probably as, I don't know for sure, but it's a top 5 payday for his career with no TV. It's not WWE. It's not WCW. It's just us trying to do a little documentary as best we can, and try to create some interest online and just leverage his name and make it look cool. And clearly it worked.
Do you think that that is like a hindrance or a help though? And the reason I ask this is because you know as well as I do, you've been around enough wrestlers now and myself, is once we kind of like get away from it, just like you did with your fandom as a kid, you get away from it. And then all of a sudden there's that one little thing, there's that robe, there's that belt, there's
Yeah.
that road trip for a wrestler, right? That you get on that road trip, or you just go to a show and watch and you're like, man, these guys are just tearing it up. And I want to get back out there again. Do you think it's more of a hindrance or, you know, a celebration, as it were, like for Rick to have his last match, but now you see him still going out there, still trying, you know what I mean? He's out there on AEW throwing punches and like dressing like a fucking stud, I must say. But you know what I mean? Sometimes we become our own worst enemies. You know what I mean? Inside of the business. I mean, at what point do you as Rick's friend, family member, so to speak, at what point do you have to say to Rick, enough's enough?
Never.
Yeah.
You know, the reality is, like, I think God has a plan and a purpose for all of us. And I think I was supposed to do mortgages, and I think I was probably supposed to be near a microphone at some point, creating content. And neither one of those were my choice. I was sort of accidentally recruited into both of those.
Right.
And then I just got comfortable and had fun. And I gotta know, maybe I found my life's purpose. Well, Rick found his a long time ago. And I think it's one of the traveling, he's not going to wrestle again. And I know that the internet believes he's going to wrestle again. He's not going to wrestle again. But the idea that he gets to be in front of a live crowd, like that's got to be one of the things that gives him life and motivation and is exciting. Like he is a professional celebrity at this point. I mean, he has I shouldn't say how much, but let's just say he does very, 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 very well. He makes top guy money just signing autographs. I mean, he goes like this on the weekend and makes what a lot of folks make in a year, and he does it in 3 hours.
Yeah.
Then he'll come back and do it the next day, and he'll make your next year's salary just doing this. So he doesn't need the money to do the AEW thing. And I know that's the narrative. Oh, Rick's broke. He must need blah, blah, blah. Not true. You know, he's got the cannabis line. He's got the energy drink, and he's still making 2 comma money signing autographs.
Right.
So he doesn't need the money, but he misses the adrenaline and the rush of being in front of the crowd. But bigger than that, he misses the camaraderie of the guys. And a lot of people who've never played team sports or they've never been a part of a sales organization, but guys who are listening to this who are in a sales organization, they know that they look forward to going to work, not to deal with the fucking customers, but to hang out with the guys and to bust balls and bullshit with the guys. And so Ric Flair's highlight is holding court in the bar after the shows with another generation of talent, telling stories and getting to be their friends and be around it. That is his motivation. So why would we tell him, hey, you shouldn't do that. Just go home and sit in the rocking chair. What? No, man. Let's go to Toronto today, Vegas tomorrow, New York the next day. Let's promote action figures and sign autographs and, you know, tell the kid in the third row to sit down, fat boy. Like he's having fun. Let him do his thing.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine like, and this is what we see. We see immediate deterioration of people when they don't get a chance to do it. You know what I mean? I was out on Saturday because I had my last match back in December. I've had a broken neck already, and and I've literally got every single vertebrae in my spine is fused together right now. So you know what I mean? It's for health reasons, it's probably best that I don't take any more bumps.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. But I still own a wrestling school here in Canada called Crossbody Studios. We're still doing fantastic things. I'm still training guys. And then I started doing commentating for a company called Neo Pro Wrestling out of Niagara Falls that asked me to come out, and I was out there on the weekend, and they just had Sean Spears and his wife came up for it. Heath was just out there on the last one. So, and these are all like, Sean Spears is one of my guys. I help break that stupid son of a bitch into the business. You know what I mean? I love Sean and his entire family to death. Fantastic people. As well. I mean, when you think about like Ontario, Canada, and Toronto, because that's the city, but not everybody's from Toronto, but just Ontario in general, the amount of talent that has been put out from Ontario, it's comparative. I compare it to the amount of NFL players that have come out of Alabama.
Yeah, there
you go. And I know that like when we first met, how many years ago, you were a young kid playing football.
Yeah.
Right. You're playing football in Alabama. How did you not pursue that end of,
I think I burned out on it. It was one of those deals where my parents started me too early. Like I was playing Pee Wee football when I was in first grade.
Right.
So eventually I just got tired of it. It was not the same. It was monotonous to me.
Do you still watch
every Alabama game there is? I'm watching. Obviously like, I'm going to watch the big games. Like when Ohio State plays, Michigan, I'm going to watch that. And when the SEC championship happens, even if Alabama's not in it, I'm going to watch that. And this, a while back, there was the rematch from the Super Bowl with the Eagles and the Chiefs. I watched that. So yeah, football is still a major passion of mine.
Now, do you follow the Alabama players? Because if that was the case, once they get into the NFL, I would assume that you would be a Philadelphia Eagles fan.
I am an Eagles fan. Yes, sir.
Atta boy. See, I knew you grew up right.
Well, I wasn't raised to be. See, my parents grew up, back in the day, there were only two games. Back in the day, there were like three channels on. So
Yeah.
you could watch the Steelers or you could watch the Cowboys. Well, my family, like on both sides, like my dad's dad and my mom's dad, they were both Cowboys fans. So I kind of didn't have a choice. But my hero as a kid was Joe Montana. He was my
Yeah.
favorite quarterback. And it was kind of cool to be contrarian to your dad since they were both NFC teams. But I could at least admit the appreciation for what the Cowboys did in the 90s. I mean, it was remarkable. But I was a Montana guy. And after 9/11, I really got behind the Patriots because it was a total accident the way that all happened. Like, Tom Brady was not supposed to be the guy. Drew Bledsoe goes down. Now this rookie quarterback steps in, and they're playing in the Super Bowl right after 9/11 against the greatest show on turf, the Rams. And they are such a huge underdog. Nobody even gives them a shot. They're not supposed to be there because of the Tuck rule and all this other shit. So people just didn't think they belonged. And I thought it was such a cool story and so fitting that on the heels of 9/11 and against the greatest show on turf, where the players are getting individual entrances, the Patriots, and what a name that is on the heels of 9/11, the Patriots run out together, in lockstep. And then during the halftime, U2 plays and they list behind them on a curtain that falls at the end all the names of the victims from 9/11. And then they come back and they win with a last minute miraculous field goal and a rookie quarterback. I was like, this is a movie. How
Right.
could you not pull for these guys?
It's a
And then
wrestling match.
it
It's a
is.
goddamn wrestling match, Conrad.
And they were the baby dog. They were the baby face underdog, and I got
Right.
behind them. And then, of course, they just had this incredible string of success. And then when they broke up the band and Belichick and Brady were there no more as a team, as sort of a, Darth Vader type team, it was like, okay, let me just follow the Alabama guys. And my wife recently watched that Kelsey documentary. I think it's on Amazon or Hulu,
Yeah.
whatever it's on. And she just fell in love with the Eagles. And I was explaining to her, well, hey, that guy right there, he played at Alabama. Oh, and that guy right there, he played at Alabama. And now with Julio Jones coming on. So now every week she's like, what time do the Eagles play? And so now in my household, the only NFL game we watch every week is the Eagles. And, she grew up in Minnesota. So she grew up as a Vikings fan. She couldn't name one Vikings player, but she could name 5 or 6 Eagles players now. So, yeah, it's been fun to follow the Eagles this year.
That's listen, I hear it in my household all the time is like, my wife she doesn't watch football, but she says, she goes, I don't like to watch football. I don't get it, but I really like to watch you watch football.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing around here. And I'm a diehard Eagles fan. I am one of these guys that, like the guy, it's funny because the guy who owns, who I own the school with, Big Ben Ortman's a professional wrestler as well. He's a diehard Cowboys fan.
Oh, wow. That's fun.
And even so much so that where I was like, all right, let's do this. Let's go to Dallas. Like I'll go into the Lions Den, no problem. Let's fly to Dallas. I'll be wearing my number 92 Reggie White jersey. You know what I mean? My throwback Kelly Green Reggie White jersey. And I will walk right into there. I will sit in the middle of a field of silver and gray stars, and they will understand what a Philadelphia Eagles fan is all about. We almost got into a fight just because apparently, you're not allowed. They don't like when you swear at a football game. Oh. Yeah. This is in Dallas, no less, Conrad. I was like, really? Okay. All right, cool. This is why none of you would ever survive going to a Philadelphia Cowboys game in Philadelphia. Like it just doesn't happen that way. So it's always, and for me growing up, it was Cunningham. Cunningham was my guy.
Oh yeah, the man.
You know what I mean? Like he was just like the epitome of that new age quarterback that that everybody seems to want to be now, and talking about Alabama though, I got to ask, who's the best player to come out of Alabama outside of Derrick Henry?
Man, listen, this is going to be a throwback. I mean, old timers might say, oh, it was Bart Starr, it was Joe Namath, but in my lifetime, I got to think it's probably Derek Thomas.
Yeah.
Like just one of the greatest linebackers in history. I mean, he was just absolutely dominant. And to think that, he was there around the same time guys like Cornelius Bennett were, and the legacy that he had. But who knows with it's crazy to think though, because for so many years of my lifetime, Alabama did not have the star quarterback.
Right.
Like I knew before my fandom, before hell I existed, I knew about, as I said, Kenny Stabler and Bart Starr and Joe Namath. But then, when we won the first national title of my lifetime, Jay Barker, respectfully, did not set the world on fire in the NFL. And so then when Brody Croyle came along, I thought, okay, here it is. And he had a nice career as a backup, but nothing really happened. And I'm friendly with Greg McElroy, and I thought for sure, hey man, that guy's football IQ is through the roof. He's going to dominate. And it didn't really happen that way, and nor did it for AJ McCarron. So I was kind of just conditioned that, okay, we're going to have great running backs like Sean Alexander. But we're not a quarterback school. And then to look now, and I realize he's having a rough season, but you got Mac Jones as a starter, and you got Bryce Young as a starter, and you got Tua as a starter, and you got Jalen Hurts as a starter. It's like, how did this happen? And the answer, of course, is Nick Saban. But
Yeah.
it's interesting to see how even during the Saban era, that's all changed a little bit. Like, they're a quarterback school now. And now with Milroe this year, just coming out of nowhere and maybe not having the best start, but really finishing strong, be interesting to see what his career looks like in the next few years too. But I think in my lifetime, it's probably Derek Thomas.
Okay. All right. And listen, Nick Saban he has to be he's the Ric Flair of coaches.
He is,
as far as I'm concerned. You know what I mean? Nobody is more decorated, deserves more, and the way that he has groomed this culture, so to speak, you know what I mean, with Alabama is unbelievable. I got to ask you, how did you end up? Because I play video games. I really don't. I play Madden. and I play PGA golf when I just want to relax. That's pretty much it. I'm too old for video games. You know what I mean? I
feel the same way.
It just wasn't my era or whatever. And I hear these, all these kids and stuff talk about it, but to be in a video game is a different world altogether. How did that come about, dude? Because when I saw this, I was like, really? Like, are you sitting on a fucking golden egg? Like you got to admit, dude, you've been blessed. You have been absolutely blessed, no doubt about it. So like, how does it come about that you end up being a character in a video game?
Well, it's a funny story because I chased Jeff Jarrett for years trying to get him to do a podcast because I was convinced that he was one of the most interesting stories in wrestling that nobody really talked about, or maybe a lot of people didn't even know or put together. And so then once we actually started working together, we realized we had similar philosophies on business. And I've learned a lot from him, and he says he's learned a lot from me, but he just has I never knew, as he calls him, BS Jeff Jarrett before sobriety. I didn't know that, Jeff. I think we would have got along and it would have been fun to party with him. But I know this guy who's trying to move forward and grow and get better and learn and evolve. He's a very well-rounded, evolved human being. And so anyway, as we have pitched a lot of ideas, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? And so we've worked on a lot of really fun stuff together. And one of those things he presented to me was the idea and opportunity to be in this video game. He created a joint venture called Moonsault Digital with the folks who were putting together the WrestleQuest game and Skybound Games. And so he said, hey, man, there's a really cool Japanese role-playing type game with like those 80s graphics from like the old WWF arcade games. And we can get the IP for some really big names like Andre the Giant and Macho Man and the British Bulldog and the Road Warriors and Bruiser Brody, et cetera, et cetera. And they wanted to have a storytelling component. So he asked if I would just talk to the guys. So we did a little Zoom and chatted through it. And the gist was, hey, in order for us to have these storylines and these angles, we need to have some out of the ring stuff and wrestling podcasting such a big thing, what if they came on your podcast and talked about, you know, their feuds or their next match or celebrated their world title wins or whatever? And I was like, wait, are you suggesting I'm going to be in the video game? And they were like, well, with your permission. And I'm like, sign me up. So yeah, that was it. You know, I never imagined that I would get to host a television series on Vice or have a show on the WWE network or do European tours with the podcast or be in a fucking video game. Like, this whole experience has been surreal. And I have my own group chat of wrestling friends, as I mentioned, from all over the country that I met at that NWA Legends Fan Fest, gosh, 10 years ago. And we're still friends to this day. And we talk 24/7 in that group chat. But every now and again, I'll just make a post in there and say, hey guys, this is it. This is the peak. It's all downhill from here. and that seems to have happened on multiple occasions. Like, I never imagined I'd be in a video game, but here we are.
What's left? What's left at this
point? No, you know, that's the thing, man.
You know,
I wouldn't have predicted Ric Flair's last match. I could have never said that would be a thing. And I mean, just little stuff along the way, like to be able to do commentary at the NWA show and at Wrestling at the Chase. The first time the NWA was back at the Chase, this historic wrestling building, and it's a pay-per-view, and I got to do commentary. And I mean, when AEW became a thing, they announced their existence in a parking lot, and I was the MC. Like, what the fuck? I'm like the Forrest Gump of wrestling. It shouldn't happen this way, but it does. And I am very thankful for the opportunity.
That is insane when you say that, because like, you don't think that one person can have this kind of an influence, especially, and here's why I say this, because what you do is you get together and you allow all of these old timers or all of these guys in the business to tell their stories, to tell, you know what I mean, to answer questions. You don't follow that the dirt sheet mentality at all. You know what I mean? Like, I find that, which is completely refreshing to me. I don't know how you feel about, you know, people that write dirt sheets out there. I personally am not a huge fan, because I think that, you know, there's a difference between telling somebody, like allowing somebody to tell their story, and just trying to expose stuff in the everyday to muddy the waters, so to speak. You know what I mean? How do you ever get flat, like any kind of flack when people try to compare the two, like try to compare you to, I'll say it, try to compare you to Dave Meltzer?
Well, no, listen, first of all, I like Dave Meltzer, and I know that some of my hosts don't, but those guys by and large have never actually met or hung out or shared a meal or a beer or had a good time with Dave Meltzer. Mm-hmm. But the real life human being is Dave Meltzer.
Right.
But to look back and expect anyone to bat 1,000 at their job, and I think sometimes some of my friends in the wrestling space who are critical of Dave, they will look at, you know, his entire report and they'll see one thing that wasn't correct and then just dismiss the rest. And I often wonder, hey, if we turn that around and applied that same logic to you, like, hey, Eric, because Eric has been maligned by a lot of the wrestling audience. And I think that was a shame. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do the podcast with him. And so after the week one of our success of the podcast, we had a little instrumental and over a video where we just touted our success about how many downloads and where we were on the charts and what the success was and how many views and all that stuff. And I told my graphics guy who was putting it together, Chris McDonald, who does a great job, I said, make the song or the music bed underneath the instrumental to Forgot About Dre. And I did that. And I showed it to Eric and he liked it. And I said, do you recognize the instrumental? And he said, nope. And so he called me and he goes, what do you mean the instrumental? I said, the music bed, the beat underneath. Do you recognize that? And he goes, no. And I said, it's Forgot About Dre. And he goes, okay. And I said, okay, let me give you the context. Yeah. This guy was a real rap pioneer who laid the groundwork for a lot of what we see today in hip hop. And he kind of went dormant after he had maybe the most classic hip hop album of all time. And when he had his next effort, many, many years later, almost a decade later, he had a track on there And the gist was, y'all motherfuckers must have forgot who did this shit, because you're the guy, the only guy who beat Vince McMahon one time, but you didn't just beat him one time. You beat him 83 weeks in a row. By the way, he beat him a lot more than 83 weeks, but he did 83 times in a row, and nobody's ever done it, and nobody ever will again. And you're the guy who turned Hulk Hogan heel, and you're the guy who found Goldberg, and you're the guy who went heads up with Raw, and you're the guy, blah, 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 blah. And so when we really started to, as I'm going through that rant, he put me on speaker so his wife could hear, because he had been just beat up forever by the internet wrestling community, because so many people would look at one failure here or there and just dismiss his entire career. And I don't think that's fair to Eric, but I also don't think that's fair to Dave. So if Dave has a report that's 90% true and 10% is inaccurate, we're supposed to shame him? Like, imagine if I applied that same logic to Bruce. Bruce has had a lot of wonderful ideas and creative. Even Bruce would say, had a few stinkers along the way too. Well, if we just like a look at the stinkers and we say, well, everything in your whole career sucked because you did this one thing, well, that's not fucking fair. That discounts and dismisses all the great stuff he did too. So I actually do appreciate Dave's opinion. I don't get too caught up in star ratings. I think they're fun. I think they are fun to make charts and graphs with. And is it a fun talking subject? Yes. But at the same time, it's one dude's opinion. He's telling you his opinion of the match. And if you read into it more than that and you say, well, the omnipotent Dave, an all-knowing Dave Meltzer said this is a 4 1/4 match. That was his opinion. It could be a 5-star match to you. What does that even mean? Like, Oppenheimer is going to win a ton of awards. I saw it. I'll never see it again. It was fine, but I'm never going to sit down and watch that movie again. Now, if I'm flipping through the channels and Casino's on when we hang up here, I'm watching all the way to the end.
100%.
And I don't care what Siskel and Ebert said. I know what I like. So I don't get too caught up in the opinions piece, if that makes sense. So I do enjoy the dirt sheets. I enjoy Dave Meltzer. I enjoy Mike Johnson. I enjoy Wade Keller. I certainly enjoy Sean Ross Sapp. I'm sure I'm missing it. Nick Hausman. These guys break stuff that it is factual, is interesting. I do appreciate their opinion, but I also know sometimes they're getting stuff wrong. I mean, I've seen stuff reported with my name that was incorrect and my friends' names that I know is incorrect, or I've been at shows and seen what actually happened backstage, and then what was reported is totally different. But I understand how they got that. Like, someone in that locker room had an agenda and they called that person and reported it. Mm-hmm. That's what happened. And so if you have a firsthand account of what happened, well, as a reporter, you probably print it. But you have to understand the lens. The person who told you that is jockeying for position. They're angling for something. They want something on the other side of this report. And when you understand that, it sort of opens your eyes up and you take it all with a grain of salt and you appreciate it for what it is. It's entertainment. Like, there's some stuff that's in the National Enquirer that's true. There's some stuff that's not true. Same thing.
Yeah, but at no time is the earth flat, Conrad. I'm telling you right now. Right?
I'm positive of that too. I would agree.
I got a couple more, and I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate this.
Yeah,
I don't know why it's taken us this long to reconnect. I hope that we can do this a lot more often. I enjoy listening to your stuff all the time. We have a common friend as well outside of the wrestling business, as it were, in one Mr. Shuli Egar, who is he a neighbor of yours?
You know that guy.
Listen, I was going to ask you the same fucking thing. Okay. How does Shuli end up wedging himself into everybody else's lives? Like, how do we know this guy?
He was listening to the Ric Flair show way back when, my very first podcast, followed me on Twitter, hit me with a DM. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I grew up a big Stern Show junkie. And I was like, dude, next time I'm in New York, you got to give me a tour of the studio. He goes, I would love to. And then when I did a show in New York with Bruce, we had him come out and have some fun with us on stage, and we hung out afterwards. It was tremendous. And so we just hit it off and became fast friends. And anytime I was up there, we would get together, or when I put together a star cast, I'd have him there. And then during the pandemic, he was looking for a way to, get the family out of New York for a bit because they were on absolute lockdown. So they took a road trip and they drove all the way from New York, Brooklyn or Queens or wherever the shit he lived. And he came down to Huntsville and he loved it, man. He got our minor league baseball hat and started looking for houses with my buddy who happens to be a realtor. And he found a hell of a house with a bunch of land. And, he went from a tiny apartment to a big house with a big yard where there's deer in the backyard. And his kids, growing up in the city, they'd never had the opportunity to just go outside and ride bikes. And it was a whole new way of life. So I was thrilled that he made the decision to move down here, and it is a different pace of life and hopefully one that he and his wife enjoy. But how in the world do you know Shuli Agar?
So we were doing, I was doing a show. I do a show called Godfathers of Podcasting with Donnie Abreu when we started, who I started live audio wrestling with. And we had the opportunity to have Bob Levy on. And so Bob comes on the show or whatever. And we hit it off with Bob, no problem. You know what I mean? It was fantastic time. And he was like, hey, I do this stuff on this YouTube channel, on this network, so to speak, called, TSN, the Shuli Network, right? And we would love to have your show over there on the Shuli Network. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird and bizarre, but okay, let's what's it entail? So we had some conversations, and then Shuli and I just kind of hit it off. Like it was, I've got nothing but respect for the guy. Like he's a fantastic, human being.
Yes.
I mean, he's one of my top 3 favorite Jewish people in the world, as I'd like to tell him.
He's in my top 3 too.
First one being Matt Cardona, right?
Wait, is Cardona Jewish?
I don't know, but that's always been the joke.
I love that.
And so we had the opportunity to put the show over there, and I'd have conversations with, Shuli all the time. And yeah, we just kind of like sprouted a friendship that way. And then eventually, we wanted to go off and do Godfathers on our own thing. They were changing some direction stuff over at the Shuli Network, and they had some staff changes, a bunch of producers left or whatever. So it was just like, you know what, the timing works out great, but I still talk to Shuli on the regular. And yeah, went down and met all of the guys. They were doing a thing down in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, not too long ago. Went down, met everybody from the crew. Like, it's just, there's a lot of similarities I find between the world of stand-up comedy and the world of wrestling. 100%. Yeah. It's the couple of guys in a car going to the next gig. It's sleeping in, shitty hotel rooms sometimes. But the camaraderie, and it's the sharing of the stories, and it's the road life that I think the similarities are just so severe that, that's what I think draws everybody to the field of being a professional wrestler. I think that's what draws comedians to being comedians, is it all comes down to the camaraderie and being able to get out on the road with your friends and for whatever, leave reality for if you're on the road for a day, if you're on the road for a weekend, if you're on the road for a month or whatever it is, like, just, you're living this rock star lifestyle as low budget as it might be. It's really, and that's why it's always been baffling to me. I've never understood why people would want to shit on that for others, unless you're just horrible human beings, and it brings us back to the fans that were on the internet. And as a person who's come from both sides, this side of the microphone and being in the ring with a microphone and, being a professional wrestler, it's always been that thing that, like, has the internet killed professional wrestling? You always hear that question, what did the internet and what did it do for professional wrestling? I'd like to hear your take on that real quickly before we wrap this whole thing up.
No, I think the internet, if anything, it's made wrestling stronger. I mean, certainly you have, it's changed the way we think about wrestling and the approach to wrestling, but it's also changed the access. Like, think about the way indie promotions used to try to sell tickets. I mean, you would have to buy radio, very expensive, buy TV, even more expensive, or put up posters. And I'm not convinced that postering a town really works in 2023. So social media, just promoting it on Facebook, promoting it on YouTube, promoting it on Twitter and Instagram, not even paid advertising, but if you want to go and really blow it up, doing paid advertising or any or all of those is an absolute game changer. So as much as there is negative in the social media space to do with wrestling, I still think overall it is a larger opportunity. It's presented a larger opportunity. So again, I think you could look at it both ways, but would kayfabe be alive if social media didn't exist? No, we would still all know. We understand. Like, just time goes on. Nothing is the way it used to be. But I think because of the internet, we get to go back and watch video of the way it used to be. Like, before the internet was where it is now. Like, when I was first meeting you, I was a tape trader.
Yeah.
Like, I had to hope that some nameless, faceless stranger I never met would accept my money order and then go copy some tapes and then put them in a mailbox, and then they would wind up in Alabama. Like, when you really think about the long, strange trip we took to get here versus now, I could just literally type it in Google, which is the world's, I mean, in YouTube, which is the world's second largest search engine behind YouTube. I'll get it right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The idea that I can watch any match at any time now is crazy. I mean, it used to be like, I wonder who has a copy of that Big Japan grocery store match. I could just go fucking look that up right now. And if YouTube doesn't have it, Vimeo or somewhere else does.
Someone's got it. Yeah.
Yes. And so I think it's been a strong net positive, and it's given guys to have an outlet. Like, you know, way back when wrestlers would put out a book and we would all be excited about the book, but man, that book really, it's over in a day. Like, you've read that book in a day and that's it. You never hear or think about that person again. Whereas, you know, thanks to shows like Grilling JR, we don't just have JR's handful of books. We've got JR every week, just sharing his opinions, giving his perspective, telling his stories. The internet has allowed those stories to have a platform and not be edited, because that's not to say that they couldn't go out and do an interview or do a dirt sheet or whatever. They could have done all of that before. How much of that's going to make air, especially if it's television? How much of it winds up on the cutting room floor? Like, I'm friends with the guys at Vice who do Dark Side of the Ring and Tales from Territories and all that, and think the world of them. But man, they come to these guys' houses and they shoot 4, 5, 6 hours, and then they try to make it work within the constraints of television. So you can't air the interview 4 or 6 hours. You have to cut it down to 17 minutes.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't exist now because of the internet. So long story short, I think the internet's a net positive.
It's funny you mentioned the Dark Side of the Ring stuff, and I've seen your stuff on there, and you know, they do all of the stories, go around everybody's house and stuff, but they do all of the matches, all of the reenactments and everything.
Yes.
They do those up here. And I finally gave in to them because they would contact me all the time, right? About they wanted me to be Undertaker. They wanted me to be my trainer, Johnny Canine. At one point, they thought, this will be the one that'll get him, you know, to do it. And it was always, for me anyways, it was always just like, my personal thing was like, no, those people, like, it's too, I will never be able to, number one, do it justice. And I always just kind of felt like I never watched the show because I don't enjoy those darker stories because I know a lot of them. I know a lot of those stories. I know a lot of these guys, but they thought that, hey, we're doing this Johnny Canine one. We'd love for you to, you know, be involved with it or whatever. I said, listen, I'll tell you if you have something right, but that's about it. And then finally they came to me and they were like, okay, last time we're going to ask you, we're doing the story on Matt Bourne. We're doing the Doink the Clown stuff or whatever. And I was like, yeah, man, because Matt was a friend of mine. I was like, you know what? I will do this one. And and so they had me come in and be older Matt Bourne. They had somebody else do the Doink stuff because they're first they come to me and they're like, well, can you cut a promo for us, you know, as Doink? And I was like, no. Number one, I would never be able to do it justice doing Doink, and number two, that that's just not my thing. So no. Okay, well, how about if we have you come in and be old Matt Bourne. And it was like, oh wait, so you're asking me to portray the part where Matt basically dies. It was weird, dude. I got to tell you, it was very weird when I not just watching it back, but laying there as you're acting out the scenes, and I'm laying there as my friend in a hospital gurney dying. You know what I mean? So the dark side is it's a really weird conundrum for me personally, being in the world, being a professional wrestler for as long as I have, but telling the story about somebody else. You know what I mean? So kudos to you guys for the way that you guys put together, like the three at the table and all of the, the stuff, all of those interview things. I think that the show would be a lot more depressing if it wasn't for those, you know what I mean? If it wasn't for those stories to go along with it.
Yeah, listen, I really enjoyed it because I felt like some of those stories needed to be told. I agree. I think some episodes are better than others, but I think there's been some that were just fantabulous. Like, man, that Adrian Adonis one this past year, I think might be my favorite one I ever
Really,
saw.
We filmed that one. We filmed all of the other stuff, the reenactment stuff, the same time that they did Matt. Yeah. So I was there for all of those days as well. And it's crazy when you watch it all put together. It's even crazier afterwards, but some of the ideas that they were kind of like when they were doing the Matt Bourne thing, and they're like, okay, you get thrown into jail and we want you to rip the sink out of the wall or whatever. And I was like, okay. So doing 3 takes while somebody sprays you in the face with water the entire time was not necessarily, a good time for me. That's for damn sure. But, reenacting of lifting up a car or all of that kind of stuff, fine. But then all of a sudden it's like, okay, in this one, you're basically taking death gurgles in a chair.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be tough. Yeah. See, I the reason maybe I like the Adrian one so much is it predated so much of my fandom. So it was really new information.
Right.
So a lot of the other stories, I knew a lot about, but I didn't know a lot about Adrian, and I was inspired enough to go, read a book about him. And I don't know, it really grew my fandom and my appreciation and my respect for the character and his work, but the man behind the character, because I just didn't know much about it. So, and I think to myself, there's probably a lot of people who watch that show who don't know these stories the way I do for the other characters, and they feel the same way. So I'm excited to see what they're working on next. I'm sure you probably know too, but I also know we're not supposed to be talking about it. So I'm really excited to see whatever it is, hypothetically, that they're working on next.
Yeah, it is going to be a good next season. And thankfully for Vice is they have that show.
Yes.
Because I mean the station itself is
definitely not doing the best in the world.
Yeah. No, definitely not. Conrad, I want to thank you so much. It's been a solid hour of sitting down and catching up with you.
When was the last time we talked? 25 years ago?
Has to be at least because I tell the story. We tell the story sometimes about like Donnie and I in Montreal.
Yeah.
For the quote infamous Montreal screw job, like when they had canceled all media for it or whatever, but we happened to get backstage because we're friends with Tiger and his dad, right? And they're like, come on, let's go. And we're there for the whole thing. And this was before cell phones or anything like that. Yeah. We went to a payphone and we're like, this needs to get out there. Who can we get a hold of that can get this out there as fast as possible? So who do we call? We call your boy from Alabama, Conrad Thompson. Got you on a payphone for that thing. I mean, dude, you were a call-in dude on the law who had your own theme music when you called in.
It's so crazy to think, which is why I was so delighted to see your name on social media. Because it's like, is this the notorious TID? Like, what in the world? And to be able all these years later to connect, even though it took a little longer than we would have liked. Now we've got each other's cell phone numbers and we're done with the social media rigmarole.
Absolutely.
I'm just so happy to talk to you today and so glad to hear that you're doing well, and had no idea we had so many commonalities, whether it's Dark Side of the Ring or Shuley and all that. It shouldn't be 25 years before we talk again. Let's endeavor to do better.
No, it'll definitely be a lot sooner. That's for sure. I'm going to be hitting you up for more of these and picking your brain because, I mean, listen, I stepped away from the world of standing behind a microphone, you know, sitting at a desk doing this stuff. You have created an absolute monster, and there's going to be things that I'm going to now learn from you.
Well,
You know,
whatever
and
that means.
so let's definitely catch up again very, very soon.
Let's do.
Conrad Thompson, it has been my pleasure. Absolutely. And for all of you that have been listening, you know, stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll wrap this whole thing up. This is The Law, live audio wrestling. We'll be right back.